macros and calories are just not working for us. We've been sold convenience as a solution to a problem that maybe we didn't have. We invest money in so many things like learning an instrument or learning a language. For some reason, people don't invest in learning how to cook. We've built an industry of fear around food. You can train, you can eat an organic, whole food diet, but if you're drinking half a bottle of wine a night, you will feel it. Take the reins back and just make it all about looking after ourselves and really loving ourselves with food, because it is the ultimate act of love.
Hi, everybody. I am Emily Capitalupo, WHOOP SVP of Research Algorithms and Data, and today I am joined by the incredible Dr. Federica Amati. Dr. Amati, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure to be here and to finally meet you in real life.
Why don't we start off super easy? Tell us about you and how you got into studying nutrition.
I started my career wanting to do medicine at school. And so I was that kid that did the sciences and, every weekend I was in hospitals, volunteering, spending time with patients. Life had other plans. So my grandmother died the day of my chemistry exam. So I turned up to the exam, but didn't do much. And at the time, I think my school thought that it would be fine because it was such exceptional circumstances. And my place was to study medicine at Imperial College. And they were like, it's fine. We understand. Everything else was A's. And then a week before I was due to start, they sort of went, actually, we can't really set the precedent. You should really resit that paper. And I was like, oh no, that's not my plan. I just wasn't planning to take a year out. So instead of doing that, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and study biomedical sciences. So very similar to the US model, because for a hot second, I was going to apply to US universities. Mm-hmm. So I thought I'll do the undergrad bit and then I can do postgrad medicine, which is available as well. But when I did the biomedical degree, I actually realized that I was so interested in the science, but I wasn't sure about how the public health system worked in the UK. So I then did a master's in public health. And it was during that master's, which I loved, that I realized so many of the diseases we're trying to prevent. All the chronic diseases are diet related. I had this amazing lecturer who is Professor Ellie Ribbley. He runs the EPIC cohort. And he was basically saying, and all of these factors we can see from our research, they all lead to increased cancer rates. And I was sort of sitting there going, what? Why isn't it? It's just me that finds this amazing. And that was it. I became so interested in understanding how to prevent disease, and nutrition quickly became the most obvious tool to do that. So I did my PhD in clinical medicine because Imperial didn't offer nutrition PhDs at the time. Did my training in nutrition separately and did another master's to get my accreditation so that I'm a registered nutritionist in the UK. Now I work clinically. I'm the head nutritionist at Zoe. I get to basically do what I've always wanted to do and try and help to improve people's lives day to day, but also massively reduce their risk of chronic disease and stop them from ending up in hospital as much.
From your research and from the work you've done at Zoe, what would you say, and I know this is like impossible to super pinpoint, but like what percentage of health begins and ends with nutrition?
Well, if you look at the data, so epidemiological big population data, the estimate is that 80% of premature deaths are preventable.
That's wild.
Okay. And the 4 lifestyle factors that can reduce that risk of premature death by 80% are not smoking.
Sure.
And when I say that, I'm like, everyone's like, yeah, sure. But people still smoke. So it should be said, right? Drink less alcohol.
Mm-hmm. So I'll lump that one in with nutrition.
Move your body more.
Uh-huh.
But improve your health, your diet is the strongest one by far.
Really?
So it used to be that smoking led to more chronic disease deaths and premature deaths. But now we live in a world where poor diet is the leading cause of premature death in chronic disease.
That's wild. And is any of that because like lung cancer due to smoking is more treatable than it used to be, or just our diets have degraded so far?
There's earlier detection of cancer rates. There's better treatments for things like COPD, so these chronic obstructive pulmonary disorders. Also, thankfully, smoking rates have started to decline. So all of the public health efforts that went into stopping the tidal wave of smoking deaths actually worked, at least in the countries that adopted the public health intervention. So we've seen this decrease. And we know that young people are smoking less. So the flip side of that is that diet has worsened across the globe. Literally, all countries have seen a degradation in their food environment. And the UK and the US really lead the way with being best in worst in class. um, so that's where we see the biggest increase in diet-related diseases across the lifespan. We've seen a doubling of type 2 diabetes in children in the US in the past 15 years. That's so scary.
A large part of that, people will hear what you said and kind of nod their head and go like, yeah, we eat a lot of crap. But I think one of the things that I've learned a lot from you and from Zoe that I think would be helpful to get, for our members to hear, our listeners to hear, is what are the ways in which our diet has degraded that people don't even realize?
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize where there is added sugar or where there is added sodium. We know that hypertension, high blood pressure is like the biggest risk factor for heart disease, which is still the biggest killer.
Yeah.
But people think, oh, I don't add that much salt to my plate. But actually, there's added sodium in your soda. There's sodium in your ketchup. There's sodium in your cereals. There's sodium everywhere that you don't even necessarily expect. And a lot of these foods do fall under the ultra-processed food category. And to your point, a lot of ultra-processed foods aren't obvious because there's no labeling for them. In fact, most ultra-processed foods have health marketing on them. So it's really hard to spot them. I mean, the classic examples are things like nut-based protein bars. They're filled with crap, honestly. And I'm yet to find one that's like, oh, actually, they've done a pretty good job with this. And they're like a health food, really. If you think about the kind of people that opt to buy these, they're people who are conscious of their training or trying to eat like a diet that supports their health. And actually, it's not going to be helpful. Then there's other foods which can look quite innocuous in the sense that ready meals that you might buy from the grocery store and you think, oh, like a 3-bean Mexican chili or something, but actually the way it's been made and the nutrients, or rather the xenobiotics, which are so emulsifiers, artificial sweeteners, things that have no real place in our diet. We never used to eat these things. They've been added in to make the food look better, taste better, have slightly better texture, last longer. And all of these things have an impact on us. Just because, artificial sweeteners were thought to be okay for us because they weren't passing through to the blood. So it's like, they're innocuous. Nothing happens. They taste sweet and it goes through and it's all good. But it goes through and your gut microbiome has to deal with it. And, some really interesting research looking at the effects on the brain of foods that are artificially sweetened. So their calorie density doesn't match their sweetness, actually disrupts our metabolism.
Yeah.
So our metabolism, instead of using that energy, goes, hang on a minute, this is much sweeter than the amount of energy we're actually getting from it. Let's not burn it all up because it doesn't match. So when there's a mismatch between sweetness of food and actual energy available, our body senses that. Is this term which I love called nutrition wisdom or food wisdom. And, we've kind of lost it because we're eating foods that taste sweet, but then don't have any actual sugar in them. And we're tasting foods that are really salty, but then actually it's just all over the place. And our body senses these things and goes, what's going on? I don't know what to do with that, basically. So there's a lot of disruption across the board. The food environment as a whole, I think, when you realize just how much of it is stacked against us for health, you kind of go, oh, wow, okay. So if you try to go to a store and you're trying to buy fresh produce or lentils or whole grains, like, a barley, for example, you have to go and look for it. You have to go to the bottom shelves and go in the middle of the grocery store. There's no fancy packaging. There's no health claims. You have to really go out of your way to buy whole foods. And then when you add to that a layer of advertising, billions of dollars spent every year on food advertising. So we're constantly being told to eat and that we're hungry and to snack and to eat some more. And are you sure you don't want to drink? And do you need a protein bar? Do you need a protein shake? We're bombarded with messaging to eat more food, even though we don't actually need to eat more food. And then when we go and try and find food, it's mostly ultra-processed food on the shelves. So it's incredibly difficult as a food environment. It's not just our choices that have changed. Our choices have changed because of what is surrounding us. And I think that's a really important point to make because often it can feel like it's individual agency. It's the person's fault that they're doing this. But for some people, it's not even an option. And for those of us who do have options, you have to work extra hard to actually eat
a
a
lot of
minimally
willpower.
processed diet, right?
I'd love to follow up on a couple of the things that you were talking about. One is, you have to work really hard. Everything that you mentioned that people are going to, like the ready packaged meals and the nut, protein bars and all that kind of stuff, it's a convenience factor.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you recommend for somebody who's, busy and looking for convenient food, but trying to eat a more minimally processed diet?
I'd like to push back on the convenience. We've been sold convenience as a solution to a problem that maybe we didn't have, right? So I caveat that with the knowledge that there are people listening who might have 2 jobs, single parenting, and caring responsibilities, in which case, yeah, okay, time is really, really short. But for a lot of us, we have been sold this idea that, oh my God, I don't have that time. I even saw an advert the other day for a ready-made food company. And the advert was basically saying, did you know that the average person spends 2 hours a day thinking about food? Imagine what you could do in that time if you just had the food made for you. And I was like, God, no. It's like the opposite of what we need. So we've suddenly been sold this idea that like thinking about preparing and actually putting time into our food it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't be doing it. Okay, let's take a really big step back, okay, and look at evolution. Until very recently, our entire days were spent foraging, hunting, finding food, then sitting, preparing it, and eating it with our tribe. Literally our entire lives used to revolve around thinking about, finding, and preparing and eating food. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to that, but to now be living in a society where food has been so commoditized, we're being told that we shouldn't even spend time thinking about it. We shouldn't even spend time preparing it. It's removing us from our food so much that we don't know where it comes from. We don't know how it's being made. And then we essentially consume it, not even thinking about it. And all of the science tells us that that is the opposite of what we should be doing if we want to foster good metabolic health, good eating habits, a good relationship with food, and actually harness the power that food has to bring us together. It's an essentially sociable thing to do, to eat with friends, eat with family, eat with colleagues, right? We're removing that even more by being like, don't think about it, just buy a thing, put it in the microwave. So that's my first challenge. My second challenge is, if you think that you're one of those people that really doesn't have time, take a look at your screen time. Most of us spend about 2 hours and 14 minutes on social media a day. Now, it's in bits, I know that. But my second challenge is priority. When we understand that food is our best tool for health, which is not a small statement, then I think we're better inclined to say, okay, I'm going to carve out 20 minutes of my day. You don't need more than 20 minutes to cook one meal. 20 minutes of my day just to make sure I get one meal in, which is like prepared and it's ready for me. And some other people are better at batch cooking, so they might separate some time out on the weekend. The first step is to find what works for you. I'm not a batch cooker, so for me, it's the 20 minutes in a day. But really carve it out of your time in the same way that we've become so much better at carving out time to go to the gym, to work out, to move, right? And it's so important that we do that. We have to apply a similar thought pattern, a similar thinking to food. We should be spending time thinking about selecting, preparing, and eating our food. Not only is it pleasurable and delicious, it's really important for our health.
You talked about how artificial sweeteners, which became obviously very popular because all the plus of sweet without any of the minus of calories, but are really disruptive to our microbiome. And I think, thank God, over the past couple of years, there's been increased understanding that like the gut microbiome is important. But I think largely people think of, the quality of your food in such this like hyper reductive way. It's like calories, fats, carbs, and proteins. And that's it. What do you wish more people knew about the microbiome? And then my follow-up question is, and what should they be doing more?
I wish people knew that our gut microbiome doesn't eat macros. Neither do we. Let's be clear. Food is complex and food has thousands of chemicals in it and we have trillions of microbes. And so when you try and map out the way that thousands of chemicals interact with each other in the food, then the way they interact when we digest them, and then you add to that the trillions of microbes, it is a literal chemistry lab in there. And taking such a reductionist view of this much fat, this much protein, and this many calories just does nothing to serve us. And actually, also in the traditional macro profile, fiber is not even mentioned.
Yeah.
And fiber is like the one thing that 95% of us are deficient in. And it's the one thing that our gut microbiome needs to thrive. Like a low fiber diet is the fastest way to decimate your gut microbiome. Macros and calories have a place. I'm not saying that they're completely useless, but they are just not working for us. And they aren't useful when considering how to improve your dietary pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Because our dietary patterns are made up of foods. They're not made out of macros and calories. So think about foods and specifically think about how you can introduce more fiber into your diet. The answer to that is super simple, and it's plants.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say plants, I don't mean plant extract in a powder, or I mean eating actual plants. There's no shortcut for this, Emily, right? I think people are often like, but can I take a supplement?
Right. I had my green powdered
right?
drinks, so I'm good.
Let's not start with the green powders. They don't even have that much fiber in them. I'm like, guys, you could have at least put the fiber in if you're going to make it, right? There's like 1 gram of fiber, pointless. So no, you need to eat the plants. Now, the great thing about eating plants is that it fills you up. You have great energy. It's cheap. It's affordable. Plants are incredibly affordable. You can get them locally. You can get them dried. You can get them frozen. You can get them however you like them.
And if they're dried or frozen, all the protein and everything is equally
good?
So
actually, I'd go as far as saying that with frozen fruits and vegetables, often the vitamins and the phytochemicals are better preserved than through the traditional food chain. So like frozen berries are
they're cheaper too.
Yeah.
So that's a great hack because I think like as the mother of a toddler who eats an insane amount of berries, the frozen organic ones are like half the price.
And also, if your toddler is teething, frozen raspberries are like nature's natural teether.
Ooh,
they love that. And so are frozen peas and frozen corn. Like frozen anything, you can put it in enjoy it in pretty much any dish or however you like to enjoy it. Like you can defrost your berries and eat them. And similarly, like with dried, I'm thinking here about pulses and beans and whole grains. They take a bit more time to prepare, but you can literally buy them in bulk. If you want to get them so they're already cooked, so you'd like remove a step, then tinned or canned or jarred, chickpeas and beans, garbanzo beans, you guys call them. They're amazing. And when they're already cooked for you, you don't need to worry about boiling them for like 2 hours. Just literally tip them onto a plate, warm them if you want. I eat them cold as well. Like I love them. And they're so easy to add to your diet. Now, whole grains like barley, like spelt, like quinoa, like buckwheat, they cook just as quickly as rice. Spelt takes a bit longer, but they're so much more nutritious than rice. Incredibly affordable. And you can batch cook those. That's the one thing I will do. Like I'll just cook a bunch, put it in the fridge. 5 days it'll last in the fridge. You can add it to your stews, add it to soups, add it to salads, just have it as a base for something else. So I think once you start adding plants to your plate, almonds, walnuts, any nuts you like. If you're allergic to nuts, don't worry, seeds are amazing. Add seeds. But once you start having them every day, we have 5 a day. I've come up with a new 5 a day.
Okay, I'm ready.
Which hits way more marks than just generic 5 a day, which often ends up in like an orange juice, an apple, a banana, like lettuce and tomato. It's not really not cutting it with that. The new 5 a day is nuts and seeds, legumes. So whether that's peas or beans or garbanzo, whatever you like, whole grains, fresh whole fruit, because that has been demonized to hell and back, and people are scared of eating fresh whole fruit, and it's so protective for our health. It's important we have it in our diet. And then the 5th one is healthy fats. So that means focusing on things like omega-3 fatty acids, but also extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds. Again, they come up twice because they're so good. If we can get those every day, you're ahead of most of the world's population. And there's so many other plants that we include, like herbs and spices. And those are even nice to haves and they make things taste great. But there's so much on offer when we talk about plant foods. And I think when we switch to this like abundance mindset of what does positive nutrition mean? It means what are you adding back to your plate? you're going to feel great. You'll be less hungry. You'll find out that it doesn't take that long to pull these ingredients together into a meal. Like it's 20 minutes is all you need. And hopefully then you'll start to be like, wow, food is great. And that relationship with food needs to come back. We've lost so many generations, the US and the UK again, not doing very well, don't learn how to cook. They don't have a relationship with food. It doesn't bring them that joy. We need to bring it back, Emily. And we both have kids, and it's like big job. We need to do it for ourselves and for them as well.
Yeah, one thing I love doing with my daughter is we have this like step stool thing. It's called like a learning tower. So she can come up and stand at our counter.
Yeah.
And I do cook with her every day. And it's like a very fun, special thing. And I found just made her a lot more curious about food. But I'll just jump on this segue. You've done a lot of research around the first 1,000 days of life, which you define as basically from conception, starts as day one. So it's roughly from conception until age 2-ish. Why is that such an important specific period to focus on?
Yeah. So it's this period of time where all the research points to it being a fundamental period of construction. And it makes sense when we think about what happens in this time. In the womb, all of the organs are built. The brain, every tissue, the shape, the bones. So you go from this sperm and egg, an entire organ is built to house this baby, which, by the way, is amazing, right? We literally just build an organ, placenta, and it's just used for that. And then you have this time period where every week is critical, which is terrifying. On one hand, you're like, oh my goodness, yeah, when I think about it, yeah, brain's built, eyes are built, like it's amazing. And on the other hand, we have to remember that the human body is super resilient and the mother's body is so well attuned to get what it needs from wherever it can. If you're somebody who's had a really difficult pregnancy, or maybe you really weren't able to eat properly, like don't worry, because your body will take calcium from your teeth to build the bones, and it will literally take protein from your muscles. So in some ways, it's about both the maternal and child health, right? We want to make sure that in the first 1,000 days, maternal nutrition is such that it has everything to build this baby with all the best building blocks without having to damage the mum a bit.
Yeah. My grandma told me that, like, when she was having her babies, and what she had been told by her mom was that, like, it was normal to lose a tooth every pregnancy because you lose so much calcium.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, that, like, it was just sort of a given that, like, well, there
Yeah.
it goes.
So in previous generations, it's like not unusual for women to find out they were pregnant because their teeth start cracking.
Yeah,
Nobody
that's
want
awful.
that. Okay, like
Yeah.
it's good news for the baby in the sense that
Right, they take what they need.
but like not great for us. So it's this time where we can have an impact on the foundations.
Yeah.
Now, later in life, there's other opportunities. There's growth spurts, and there's specific times when there's huge brain development, or specific times when metabolic flexibility is important. But the foundations and the blueprint, they're set in that time frame. For me, what does this mean? It's like we should be empowering women and couples and parents to know how important it is and to make all the adjustments they can to really focus and hone in on this time and make sure that not only is maternal health as good as it can be and nutritional status, but then postnatally making sure that the infant is exposed to the best possible environment, the best possible foods, that weaning. Now we're at a point where infants are exposed to about 70% of their energy intake from ultra-processed foods.
I read that in your book.
But, I've worked with women who come to me for help because they think their child is a fussy eater. I will, work with them and sit with them, and I realize that a lot of the foods these children are eating are from a packet. And they always have been. When they're presented with a broccoli, they have no idea what to do with that. Food marketing on children's food products is such that parents trust those foods more than they trust food. So that, you have these foods that say safe for toddlers or perfect for weaning or feeding.
Yeah, oral motor development. Yeah. Like as if you're helping your child's language development by then like knobby biscuits.
What?
Yeah.
And so, but this is the world we're in is like these companies are allowed to say this on pack. And parents have no education from anywhere else to support them to say, actually, you're better off just letting your child learn how to peel a banana or letting them smush like a sweet potato and play with it. There is no support for parents. It's amazing to hear you cook with your little one. That you've done that because you have the education and the access to know that's a good idea, but many parents don't. And so I've been in situations where babies are the best because they'll try anything. You can put anything in front of them and they'll give it a go. And I've seen sort of babies around the age of 7, 8 months, 9 months, and they're sitting at the table with their parents in restaurants and they're trying to grab for the avocado, grab for the scrambled eggs, or grab for the sourdough toast. And mum will be like, oh no, here's your pouch because it's safe, because it's safer.
And it's tidy. Yeah.
That's honestly a disservice to that child, but it's not the parents' fault. It's the way that this industry has evolved to basically prey into parents' fears. Safe, you're not going to choke, all these things. And so now we've got a generation who quite quickly goes from, same taste every day from formula milk to food from a pouch with no texture and no understanding what food looks like. And then we expect them to eat food. It doesn't really work like that, right? So we need to reframe how we approach food. We've built an industry of fear around food for so many reasons, including sugar, including if you eat this, you'll put on weight. And so people fear food more than they enjoy it now. And we need to completely flip that over and say, listen, food actually is there to be our ally for our health. We've evolved with this food. Our gut microbiome you were asking about earlier, we co-evolved with the gut microbiome. We're like, our colon is way bigger, longer, and has way more surface area than other mammals. One of the theories as to why our brains were able to develop so much and why we're able to be so much sentient beings with thoughts is partly because of the gut microbiome and the gut-brain connection. There's a reason we've evolved to eat these foods, these fiber-rich, these berries and these roots and these plants. Our gut microbes evolved with us to help us break those fibers down into useful chemicals that we use for our health, right? And now we've just we're going backwards to disassociating from the foods that got us here in the first place. It's tricky. The first 1,000 days is one of those topics which can be quite emotional and emotive. And my intention is never to put the pressure on the parents, especially mothers. We have enough pressure as it is. But it's more about, if you don't have the knowledge, you can't empower yourself with the information.
Well, I think it's scary how we've institutionalized this fear and this disinformation. My daughter was in the NICU for 4 days when she was born, and so we had to do certain things that you wouldn't otherwise have had to do, including we had to take an infant CPR class. And I was actually an EMT for 7 years, so that was fine. But they talk about, your kid is going to choke on food. And so you sort of leave with all food, first and foremost, is a choking hazard. And of course, you don't get any education in the NICU around you have a virgin microbiome that you can either seed with crap or with food. So much of what we hear about food is it's a choking hazard. And very little of what we hear about food is what does a toddler or, a weaning infant actually need?
So I think part of the problem, though, the reason for that is because most medics don't have nutrition education. It's very recent that medical schools have nutrition education. In London, so at Imperial College School of Medicine, I'm the nutrition lead for the medical students there, and we've been going for 3 or 4 years. So none of the senior medics have been taught. Yeah. And in the US, it's similar. I think there was a bill that was passed maybe 3 years ago to put nutrition education in the medical school curriculum. The medical system isn't equipped to advise us with nutrition. And I think part of the beauty of what companies like ours, like Whoop and Zoe, we're helping people to take agency back and be like, okay, you can't rely on external forces because the food environment isn't great, advertising isn't great, food marketing isn't great. So you have to sort of take things into your own hands and go back to that food wisdom I was talking about. Trust your body, understand how it works, and learn how to do it yourself. Invest in learning how to cook. I find it so funny how we invest money in so many things, like learning an instrument or learning a language or getting a personal trainer, taking yoga classes. But for some reason, people don't invest in learning how to cook. It's a life skill. You're not born knowing how to cook, right? So you either have a mum like you that exposes you from early age, or like my mum, all our conversations were in the kitchen. But if you don't take a cooking class, like it'll revolutionize your life. And I think taking that agency back, for me anyway, it's such a driver for why I do what I do, why I write books like that. I mean, my book, everybody should know this, it's so funny because in it, there's quite a lot of detail about quite a lot of things that, I think I spent quite a long time writing about hypertension and the renin-angiotensin system. And I just think it's important, if you want to understand how blood pressure goes up and how you get to a place where you have high blood pressure, understanding the mechanisms behind it is quite useful if you're that way inclined. Otherwise, you can just look at like what you can do to improve it. But for me, like education and understanding mechanisms can have a real transformative impact on people embracing improving their own health and getting excited about what they can do for themselves and what they can do for their families, and maybe becoming a little bit boring at dinner parties for a while you're like, did you make your own sauerkraut? But it's a real discovery, and I think it's such an amazing way to empower people.
So I have been following the Zoe diet for the better part of a year now, and I think have drank the Kool-Aid. I think you've clearly drank the Kool-Aid, or very much not Kool-Aid, but
opposite of that.
You've internalized the wisdom. And I think you talked a lot earlier in this podcast about how, if you try this and you eat, the daily 5 after a couple of days or weeks, you'll realize that there's a lot of wisdom here and you'll feel better. But there's probably a lot of people listening right now who are, but maybe not for me, or a little bit skeptical or just overwhelmed by the change. If people said, like, I'm going to give Dr. Amati 30 minutes a day, it sounded like 20 minutes to cook, but what are just some really practical, simple things people can do, low time commitment, while they ease their way into a more plant-based, whole food-based diet?
Good question. And Emily, I guess you've done Zoe, so you know that it is a gradual process. So like, I think what I love about what we do in our membership is that we take people by hand and we take it step by step. And those food changes are gradual so that it can integrate into your life. But often what I will say is, if you don't know where to start, start with breakfast. So about 20 to 25% of our energy intake on average comes from our breakfast. And most of us have some sort of control in the morning on what we're going to eat, whether that's because we're eating it at home or because we have like 5-10 minutes in the morning to pull something together and take it with us. If in doubt, start with breakfast. Whether that means eating it at home, as I said, that could be, again, name it. If you've got time to make it at home, it can be beans with eggs. It can be like a mushroom sourdough situation. It could be a lovely steel cut oats with frozen berries. There's so many options. And if it's something you're taking with you to work, then you have loads of options again. Like, I love making kefir yogurt, seed, nut, and berry little pots. And I just take them with me anywhere I go. I've always got them. They're old jam jars, basically. And and the frozen berries, keep it cool. So it's like revolutionary.
It's a good hack. Yeah, no ice pack required.
But even sometimes it's just boil a couple of eggs, a handful of almonds, and an apple, and take it with me. But you can always, even if you've only got 5 minutes before you have to get out the door, you can usually pull something together. And so breakfast is the simplest way to start. And then the other thing that contributes, again, UK and US, we're a population of snackers. And that contributes about 25% of our energy intake. And snacking is often the worst culprit for quality of diet, because we grab and go something on the way, on the fly, from a coffee shop, from a store and that's where like the bars creep in, or the muffins for that. So Professor Sarah Berry, who's our chief scientist and an absolute legend in nutrition science, she actually ran a trial where she just asked participants to swap their snacks for a handful of nuts. And in her trial, it was almonds. And within 2 weeks, she saw changes in markers of health just from changing to just told everyone to bring almonds with them. And if they felt peckish, have that. Now, of course, it's not all about nuts. If you're allergic or if you want to vary, fresh fruit is great. As I said, you can boil eggs. You can make your own pots of grains, with vegetables. It doesn't matter what it works for you, but if it's a whole food based and you're avoiding buying that quick grab and go snack, you're already making a huge impact.
Yeah, I love the recommendation around almonds, both because obviously, Dr. Berry's research proved that it's efficacious, but also it can be every bit as convenient of a grab and go food. So not everything is, swap out your potato chips with like something that takes an hour to go and carefully craft. Like some of it really is equally convenient. So it's just about the quality of the choice.
So easy, because if you have a big bag of almonds at home and you put them in a jar, you literally grab a handful, pop it in a little Tupperware or a little bag, and you can take it with you. I mean, I have nuts in all my bags. But also, I think another thing that's worth mentioning here is, and this is something that I see a lot in clinic. So I work clinically with a medical concierge company called Well Founded. We look after people from like start to finish, basically. And it's interesting because a lot of the time I'll speak to patients and I'll be like, I'm like, okay, you've got a really good diet, you're working out, something's not working for you. And it's often one of two things. Either alcohol. You can train, you can eat an organic whole food diet, you can do all the things. But if you're drinking half a bottle of wine a night, you will feel it. Your body will tell you off. Being honest about what your relationship with alcohol is, and if you are one of these people who drinks most nights, it needs attention. Like that cannot continue, right? And the second thing is sugar sweetened beverages or diet beverages. I have some patients who are like, I always have a soda at lunch. I'm like, why? We're doing all this lovely work, and then why do you buy? These two things often also creep into people's dietary patterns, and they will kind of ignore them until it's not quite working out. And then so it's worth mentioning those. So it's breakfast, snacks, and mind what you're drinking, because it does have an impact. And then if you want to give Zoe a go and go full deep dive metabolic health and nutrition, you can. But in the meantime, doing those two things, or four things if you include the drinks, it makes a huge difference.
It's so good to call out beverages. I read a article at some point a couple years back, but that like it wasn't appreciated that calories in beverages like counted until like the 70s, because they just assume like, they're sort of solid things and then like liquids just things go through you, right? Like it doesn't count, those were free or something. And then I guess it must have been around like when soda was really taking off that they were like, oh, maybe these calories count too, or the sugar counts too. That does tend to be a sneaky place, especially because I guess with straws and things, like you don't even pay attention to it. No, it goes down so.
And so many sugar sweetened beverages sell themselves as other things, energy drinks,
sure,
pre-workout, whatever. Like there are elite athlete exceptions where they might actually need that high sugar beverage, but for the vast, vast, vast majority of us, it's not necessary. And it's not necessary for the 1 hour berries class you're about to take either. I think often there's this idea that like if you're doing a hard workout, you need to really pay attention to rehydrating with sports drinks. And it's just, most of the time you can just have some water and a banana, you'll be fine.
Oh yeah, you can't go to like a park run, like casual 5K without being given, half a liter of, sugary sports drinks. And it's like, I promise you didn't like burn that.
You probably don't need that. So yeah, it's worth noting. I think a lot of these things are sold to us as, I call it lifestyle sports.
Yeah.
There is science to support use of these things for elite athletes. But that doesn't apply to most of us.
No. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. As we wrap up, what's something maybe fun or unexpected that you didn't get a chance to share, but you think that our listeners would enjoy hearing?
So I think I often get asked, because I talk a lot about the first 1,000 days and the importance of childhood, adolescence, and all these things. People are, is it too late for me? Is it too late for me to make this change? And it's like, no, it's not. So there's some amazing trials. New Age One is one of my favorite trials, where they gave a Mediterranean dietary intervention to adults living in care homes. And they looked at their microbiome and health markers of frailty. Frailty is this like measure that we have to see when resilience really starts to decline. And for older people, it can mean that they get very sick from a very minor illness and then don't recover. So frailty is something we want to avoid. And in these trials, after 2 weeks of the Mediterranean dietary intervention, and it got better up to 16 weeks. Older adults reduced all their frailty markers, their gut microbiomes considerably changed, their cognitive performance and their physical ability improved. It's never too late. Now, one of my favorite studies that looked at modeling these dietary improvements actually showed that if you change your diet at the age of 40 from like our baseline, not very good diet,
Standard American diet.
sad,
Yeah.
love that acronym,
Sad for a reason.
to just improving it to the public health guidelines. So like not aspirational, but just normal. You add like quite a lot of life years. But if you then switch up and improve to a longevity Mediterranean dietary pattern, so everything we've been talking about today, extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, leafy greens, like beans, then you can look at adding up to 11 years to your life at 40, which is like awesome. And if we do the same thing at 70, you're adding up to 6 years to your life. That's like a lot of time. So it's never too late to start. It's never too late to make a change. And even if that change seems minimal, even if it's just your breakfast, you will be making an impact on your dietary pattern. It's about the consistency, not perfection. And most of all, I really hope that anyone listening can just re-embrace the joy of food. Just really make something delicious and sit down and enjoy it and realize that it's good for you, it's good for your microbes, it's good for your taste buds, and you're going to feel great after you eat it, and it's going to help you feel better tomorrow. Yeah, joy of food, and it's never too late to start.
I love that we're going to end on that note of optimism, that this stuff's really important, but if you've been slacking for the last 40 years or so, no worries, not too late to start.
And it's not your fault that you've been slacking. The food environment is working against us, so it's up to us to turn around, take the reins back, and just make it all about looking after ourselves and really loving ourselves with food, because it is the ultimate act of love.
At Whoop, we often say that you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think that Zoe has done such a beautiful job helping you measure and therefore manage the quality of your diet in a way that goes so far beyond the traditional just macros and calories that we're used to nutrition being reduced to. So, we're very grateful to you, Dr. Amati, for sharing your discount code, which is Federica10 for 10% off of the Zoe program for anybody who wants to go and check it out and learn more.